Well, GM's Cruise autonomous vehicles are doing fantastically and driving people around with hardly any interventions, while Tesla has had to halt production of all of their autonomous vehicles. Wait, opposite of that. Let's take a look. Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. Before we start, a quick public service announcement. Over the next few days, you will see some red welts coming up on my face. Those are nitrogen burns. I went to the dermatologist this morning and they had to burn off several small precancerous things. Definitely get your skin checked out every year. Certainly if you're over 30 or 40 years old, you should do that. It's just something you need to do. You don't want to let this stuff go because it's a lot easier to have these tiny little things frozen off with liquid nitrogen than to wait for the alternative and get skin cancer. So if you don't yet have a dermatologist, you should definitely find one. Your future self will thank you. All right, and now to it. Let's start with this article published just a couple of hours ago on CNBC. GM to halt production of Cruise driverless vans. General Motors said Monday it plans to temporarily halt production of its fully autonomous Cruise Origin van just days after the unit said it was pausing all driverless operations. So this, by the way, is the Origin van, and if you scroll down here, this is the vehicle people are probably more used to when they think about Cruise. But anyway, they do also make this Origin van. Continuing on, the move was first reported by Forbes, citing an audio of Cruise CEO Kyle Vogt's address at an all-hands meeting. Vogt, according to Forbes, told staff during the meeting that the company has produced hundreds of Origin vehicles already and that it's, quote, more than enough for the near term when we are ready to ramp things back up, end quote. And by the way, keep that, quote, more than enough in mind for the next article. A GM spokesperson told Reuters, "We are finished producing on a small number of pre-commercial vehicles and after that plan to temporarily pause production. We believe autonomous vehicles will transform the way people move around the world, and the Origin is an important part of the AV journey," the spokesperson added. Cruise, the driverless car unit of General Motors, said last month it would halt operations nationwide after California regulators suspended the robotaxi operator's license, saying self-driving vehicles were a risk to the public. Cruise, in February 2022, petitioned U.S. regulators seeking permission to deploy up to 2,500 self-driving Origin vehicles annually without human controls like steering wheels. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, or NHTSA, said in July it expected to make a decision on the petition in, quote, weeks, but last month opened a new probe into whether Cruise is taking sufficient precautions to safeguard pedestrians after opening an investigation in December that is ongoing. The Cruise Origin vehicle, built in Detroit, was jointly developed by GM, Cruise, and Honda. And interestingly enough here, Cruise's board has hired law firm Quinn Emanuel to review Cruise management's responses to regulators investigating an October 2nd accident, and technology consultancy Exponent to review Cruise's technology, the company said Friday. So yeah, a, quote, temporary halt to production of these vehicles. We'll see how temporary this is. Let's face it, after a night with drinks, I don't bounce back the next day like I used to. And so the choice has been have a great night or a great next day. That is until I found ZBiotics. ZBiotics pre-alcohol probiotic is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. And for those who want to know, here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. ZBiotics pre-alcohol probiotic produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. It's designed to work like your liver, but in your gut where you need it the most. Just remember to drink ZBiotics before drinking alcohol, drink responsibly, of course, and get a good night's sleep to feel your best tomorrow. Go to zbiotics.com/drknow or scan the QR code on your screen right now to get 15% off your first order when you use Dr. No at checkout. You can also sign up for a subscription using my code so you can stay prepared no matter the time or the occasion. ZBiotics is backed with a 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. I had the opportunity to try ZBiotics for the first time last weekend, and I can honestly say ZBiotics made a huge difference. I drank a bottle of ZBiotics before hanging out with friends, stayed hydrated between drinks, and the next day I felt great. I have to say this is a real game changer for those fun nights. Thanksgiving is right around the corner, so make sure you stock up on ZBiotics pre-alcohol probiotic before the feast. Trust me, you'll be thankful you did the next day. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/Dr. No and use the code Dr. No at checkout for 15% off. A big thanks to ZBiotics for sponsoring this video, and now let's get back to it. Okay, and now on to this more in-depth CNBC article about the problems that Cruise is having. Cruise confirms robotaxis rely on human assistance every 4 to 5 miles. And that headline kind of says it all, but it gets even worse when you dig into this article. But relying on human assistance every 4 to 5 miles is not the kind of thing that you want out of a fully autonomous vehicle. Remember, these are, level 4 autonomous vehicles, which means that you hail a taxi cab, you get in, it's supposed to drive you in the San Francisco Bay Area and a few other areas to wherever your destination is on its own without any human intervention. Yet that does not seem to be the case at all here. What this is saying is that before Cruise stopped operations, if you wanted to take a 10 or 11 mile drive around the Bay Area and you got in the car, odds are that a human would have to intervene with the vehicle twice before you got to your destination. That's pretty crazy. And of course, as always, I will put a link to both of these articles in the description. And before we read the article, this image caption is wonderful. This Cruise in San Francisco seemingly could not figure out how to pull aside on a narrow street to let a bus pass. So yeah, not a great look for Cruise at all. And if you look up here closely at the rear of the vehicle, you can also see may stop quickly on the back side of the vehicle. So, I mean, that's, again, driving a Tesla around with full self-driving, sometimes it does put on the brakes unnecessarily, not so much anymore, but that's a really interesting thing that is just like printed on the back of the vehicle, that it may stop quickly to warn people not to follow too closely. Reading from the article, Cruise CEO and founder Kyle Vogt, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I think it's not Voigt, but Vogt, but I could be wrong about that. Anyway, Kyle Vogt posted comments on Hacker News on Sunday, responding to allegations that his company's robotaxis aren't really self-driving, but instead require frequent help from humans working in remote operations center. First, Vogt confirmed that the General Motors-owned company does have a remote assistance team in response to a discussion under the header, GM's Cruise alleged to rely on human operators to achieve, quote, autonomous driving. And this human operations center, by the way, is not news. They've made a public statement about all of this stuff, so I don't know why this would even be a thing at this point. This is definitely known. What wasn't known is how frequently the humans were needed. The CEO wrote, Cruise AVs are being remotely assisted 2 to 4% of the time on average in complex urban environments. This is low enough already that there isn't a huge cost benefit to optimizing much further, especially given how useful it is to have humans review things in certain situations. CNBC confirmed with Cruise spokesperson Tiffany Testo that the comments were accurate and came from the company's CEO. And let's flip back to that previous article when I said to hold on to that thought for a moment. Note that Vogt said here about the shutdown of production that they've produced hundreds of Origin vehicles already, and it's more than enough for the near term. So yeah, he keeps saying more than enough, everything is fine, it's all good. That seems like the house on fire meme with the dog going, it's fine, everything's fine, right? So again, note here he says, this is low enough already that there isn't a huge cost benefit to optimizing much further. That sounds like somebody who realizes they got 80% of the way to the solution, and the last 20% is going to be really, really difficult. And they're like, oh, we don't really need to do that last percent. We would prefer to have humans involved. Believe me, they would not. Humans are very expensive. You don't want to have to pay for these people. The whole point of making this a profitable company is to have the vehicles operate on their own without a whole bunch of humans there. Otherwise, why not just have Uber and have people in the driver's seats? It would be much, much simpler to do that. And believe me, whoever is sitting in this center and operating these vehicles remotely is being paid a lot more than Uber drivers are. So these people are expensive, and Vogt's statements about the fact that they don't need to do any better is complete BS in my mind. They do need to do better because otherwise the company would never be able to be profitable. So you could say this is making the best of things, or also you could say this is putting lipstick on a pig or something like that. So GM's Cruise might be a pig and he might be trying to put a little lipstick on it. It's not going to make the pig look any better. Anyway, continuing on, Cruise recently took the drastic move of grounding all of its driverless operations following a collision that injured a pedestrian in San Francisco on October 2nd. The collision and Cruise's disclosure around it led to state regulators stripping the company of its permits to operate driverless vehicles in California unless there is a driver aboard, which isn't really driverless vehicles in that case. The DMV previously said its decision was based on several factors, citing 4 regulations that allowed suspension in the event the department determines the manufacturer's vehicles are not safe for the public's operation and the manufacturer has misrepresented any information related to safety of the autonomous technology of its vehicles. And then we get to some details about the incident. As NBC News previously reported, California Department of Motor Vehicles accused Cruise of failing to show them a full video depicting the October 2nd collision, during which a pedestrian was thrown into the path of the Cruise robotaxi by a human driver in a different car who hit her first. And if you don't know, I I obviously don't have all of the details. I just know what I've read. But a human driver hit a person in, I believe, a crosswalk and collided with her and threw her in front of a Cruise taxi that was driving autonomously. Not the fault of the Cruise taxi, right? If you're a human and that happened, it's like really unfortunate. But what did happen and what Cruise did not show the regulators was what happened after that. So the vehicle slammed on the brakes, tried to stop, but still collided with this unfortunate person. But then what it did was it actually pulled over and apparently drove several miles an hour to pull over to the side of the road instead of just remaining still and not doing anything. And Cruise did not show that to the regulators. That's the really big part that pissed off the DMV, and obviously it should. Continuing on here, during that incident, Cruise previously told NBC its vehicle braked aggressively before impact, and because it detected a collision, but then tried to pull over and in the process pulled the pedestrian forward about 20 feet. I don't believe that they originally said this, at least in the early articles that I read, which happened right after October 2nd. I don't believe that they said anything about moving after the collision. It just said that they collided with somebody. So again, it sounds like what they were doing was covering things up, and it was only when they were found out to be incorrect, possibly somebody on the street had a video of it or something like that, and they were proven to be incorrect, and then they showed the regulators and they told NBC about the truth of the matter. So if you knew that news, this is all relatively old news at this point, but this is where things get really interesting. How often do remote workers intervene? A New York Times story followed last week, diving into issues within Cruise that may have led to the safety issues and set back Cruise's reputation and business. The story included a stat that at Cruise, workers intervene to help the company's cars every 2.5 to 5 miles. You see here the headline above here says 4 to 5 miles, but the New York Times article actually says 2.5 to 5 miles. Vogt explained to Hacker News that the stat was a reference to how frequently Cruise robotaxis initiate a remote assistance session, or as us normal people would call an intervention. He wrote, "Of these, many are resolved by the AV itself before the human even looks at things, since we often have the AV initiate proactively and before it is certain it will need help. Many sessions are quick confirmation requests, is it okay to proceed, that are resolved in seconds. There are some that take longer and involve guiding the AV through tricky situations. Again, in aggregate, this is 2 to 4% of the time in driverless mode." CNBC asked Cruise to confirm and provide further details on Monday. The Cruise spokesman wrote in an email that a remote assistance session is triggered roughly every 4 to 5 miles, not every 2.5 miles in Cruise's driverless fleet, which is where the headline of the article comes from. So for those of us who have driven full self-driving beta over the years, especially in the earlier days, what you would have to do sometimes is touch the accelerator pedal to convince the car to go through something. It would kind of hesitate and you would have to touch the accelerator pedal to drive through a situation like maybe it's a little bit crowded and the car was a little confused, or there was a stop sign and there were a number of people at the stop sign and it didn't know if it was its turn or something like that. Those are the sort of situations similar to this, it sounds like, where you just press on the accelerator a little bit, or in this case, the assistant, the remote assistant would say, yes, it's okay to go ahead, and then the car proceeds. So it's asking a question, it's a quick intervention. It sounds like the other ones tend to be further apart. Continuing on, oftentimes the AV proactively initiates these before it is certain it will need help, such as when the AV's intended path is obstructed, e.g. construction blockages or detours, and by the way, it should just be able to handle that autonomously. This is the kind of stuff that Tesla's been working on for years, and their cars actually handle, blockages, construction, stuff like that fairly well. Or if it needs help identifying an object, which also, by the way, Teslas do very, very well. And if they don't even know what the object is, they can still represent it on screen as kind of a blob, and it can still work around that object. So you can see where Cruise's technology is behind what Tesla is doing specifically. Remote assistance is in session about 2 to 4% of the time the AV is on the road, which is minimal. And in those cases, the RA advisor is providing wayfinding intel to the AV, not controlling it remotely. This is an important point. They're not actually steering the car or driving it, radio control or something like that. But what they're doing is they're giving it information. But the problem is that this information sounds like stuff that the car should probably be able to handle most of the time on its own. And then when requested, the spokesperson said that more than 98% of sessions are answered within 3 seconds. So that is pretty reasonable. That means that even out of this, if you have an intervention every 4 or 5 miles, at least the intervention is going to be very brief, and probably most people driving in the robo-taxis won't even notice it because it'll just happen in a couple of seconds. They might think the car slows down weirdly for a second or two, and then it takes back off again. But certainly this is not really L4 autonomy if they're having to intervene that often. Even if it's just a quick intervention, it means that the car is asking questions to these remote operators and they're having to answer the question. So it's very, very similar to what Tesla's full self-driving, which is still currently labeled level 2 assistance, or ADAS, or in other words, advanced driver assistance systems, not level 4, which is fully autonomous operation. So you've got something that really is driving more or less like a Tesla full self-driving system is, but they're calling it level 4 instead of level 2. And the other thing is that the technology behind this is way, way, way more primitive than what Tesla has. Their vehicles cost well over $100,000 because of all the equipment they have to have on it, and they can only drive in very restricted geographic areas. They can't do it in all of North America like Teslas do. And of course, that's because they use HD mapping, LiDAR, all sorts of other things in order to understand where they are, whereas Teslas just simply use vision at this point. That's all they have. They don't have radar, they don't have ultrasound, they don't have LiDAR, they don't have anything. They just have 8 cameras around the car, and that's enough for the cars to drive autonomously 99 point something percent of the time. So you can see where Cruise is very, very much behind Tesla in terms of technology, but they have the kind of audacity to call themselves level 4 when they're really not. If they're having to have people intervene that frequently, they're not level 4 autonomy. They're level 2, 2.5. Maybe you could call it level 3, but even that probably is an overstatement of the case. And as for the part about these remote advisors being paid more money than an Uber driver, well, here you go. They have a lot of training they have to go through, and then advisors also receive ongoing training and undergo supplemental training whenever there is a new feature or update. Regular reviews, refreshers, and audits are conducted to ensure high performance. And all of that means expense, right? This is not something that comes free of cost. You have to pay these people more money, and then all of these training sessions and stuff cost money as well. I drove Uber myself for a short period of time, and they didn't pay me anything except for the miles that I drove. I got no training. I did have to submit documents to prove that I was a reasonable driver and all of that kind of stuff, but they didn't have to pay me that much money. But these people, especially given the fact that they live in Silicon Valley, San Francisco area, are probably being paid a pretty penny to do this advising. And this is the real kicker here. As far as the ratio of remote assistance advisors to driverless vehicles on the road, the Cruise spokesperson said, during driverless operations, there was roughly 1 remote assistant agent for every 15 to 20 driverless AVs. And if you're talking about somebody who's being paid a reasonable amount of money, 1 person for every 15 to 20 cars, that adds up really quickly, right? And certainly it's unscalable. You can't do this at a nationwide level and have like 1 million of these things on the road, when having that many supposedly autonomous taxis on the road would necessitate having 50,000 employees to drive those vehicles. That's just not a scalable business model at all. And then Missy Cummings rears her ugly head again. If you don't know, she was very much against Tesla and its full self-driving, and reportedly she has investments in LiDAR companies and things like that. So watch how much she soft pedals this whole situation, whereas historically she's really come after Tesla hard. Autonomous systems expert Missy Cummings, who was previously safety advisor to NHTSA, told CNBC that whether or not the public still considers Cruise vehicles self-driving, it has been, quote, an industry standard for humans to be on call, monitoring the operations of drones, robotics, and now autonomous or semi-autonomous vehicles. So basically she's saying this stuff is okay and it's no big deal and it's always been done this way. This is not the way towards the future, people. If you have to have humans involved, it's not fully autonomous. Anyway, she continues on, I start to get concerned, she said, about how we're using humans when we are using them. In other domains, we've seen issues where, for example, an air traffic safety controller maybe fell asleep on the job. Cummings also said it would be very important to understand whether Cruise vehicles involved in any collisions, especially in the October pedestrian collision, called back to remote operations for help. I would like to know whether a human was notified at all and what the human's actions were in the remote operations center. And finishing up here, Cruise declined to say whether the October 2nd incident triggered a remote assistant call, whether a human advisor made decisions to authorize the vehicle's movement, or whether any Cruise employee had called 911. The company spokesperson said, we have initiated third-party reviews of the October 2nd incident and are working with NHTSA on their investigation as well. In respect of these processes, we will await the findings of those reviews before commenting further, which is reasonable when an investigation is ongoing that they wouldn't comment about that. So I'm not going to, ding them for that. But the cherry on top of this whole thing is GM said last month that the company had lost roughly $1.9 billion on Cruise in the first 9 months of this year, including $732 million in the third quarter alone. So overall, what we have here is a company that was declaring that it was driving level 4 autonomy, but it was not. It was really like level 2 autonomy, except that the person wasn't sitting in the driver's seat. They were sitting in a remote call center or an advisor center, and they were making decisions for the vehicle in an ongoing basis every 4 to 5 miles. And that means that the car was really a level 2 autonomous vehicle, not a level 4 autonomous vehicle, like Cruise was saying. And as opposed to Tesla, which sells its vehicles, and we pay for the privilege of full self-driving beta and everything. So Tesla actually makes money in order to support their research and development of this product further. GM and Cruise, on the other hand, do make a small amount of money from the taxi rides and from people who are riding around the city with the vehicles, but they're obviously spending way more money than that on Cruise itself. 1.9 billion lost just in 2023 alone. That's a staggering number. If you haven't seen my video on Volkswagen yesterday, check that out, because I talk about Carriot and how they've lost $5.5 billion in the last 3 years on their, software stack and everything like that, and how it's a big boondoggle. Well, Cruise is actually on track to lose more money than that over the same amount of time. So this is a massive investment of money by a company like GM that is already on the ropes in terms of the amount of debt and the amount of technology and everything that they have to push forward to transition to electric vehicles right now. This is a really big boondoggle, and my prediction is that Cruise is probably going to die a quiet death. They will probably be taken off the roads. This investigation will happen. And then maybe what will happen is we'll see human drivers back in the driver's seats again, and they'll drive around for a while and state that what they're doing is doing research and everything, but that eventually this will be strangled off and we won't really see Cruise on the roads anymore as a level 4 autonomous vehicle. And in that case, that only leaves Waymo for that similar type of level 4 autonomous vehicle. They don't seem to have been involved in nearly as many incidents as Cruise has been, so they may be doing a better job. But just to be very clear, they also have remote advisors who are advising the vehicle on situations and getting them out of potentially difficult situations. And of course, they also rely on LiDAR, high definition mapping, and all sorts of things like that. So it's the same technology basically as Cruise. It just sounds like Waymo is doing a better job, which is not surprising because GM owns Cruise and Google owns Waymo. So you take a guess as to which is a better technology company. And all the while this kerfuffle is happening, Tesla is still improving their full self-driving beta software. We Tesla drivers are paying for this privilege, quite a bit of money, $12,000 for full self-driving beta. And the product works everywhere in North America, in the United States and Canada. And further than that, the technology that's on the cars is on the order of a couple $1,000s, the cameras and the hardware board and everything. And it's built into every car, no matter whether you pay for full self-driving beta or not. Whereas Cruise and Waymo and the like are using these very expensive things stuck onto these vehicles that not only look ugly as anything, but cost a fortune. So these cars are very expensive. People don't pay upfront for them. They only pay per mile, which is a relatively small amount. You also have these remote advisors who are working, and I expect they're relatively well paid to do that kind of a job. This is just an unscalable solution. It's just economically not viable, whereas Tesla's solution is economically viable. And that will be the thing that when Tesla decides that they want to move from level 2 to level 3, even if it's only in certain circumstances like good weather in certain geographical areas, they can just do that right away. And because Tesla's full self-driving beta has driven hundreds of millions of miles at this point, they also have the data to prove to NHTSA and any state's Department of Motor Vehicles. They can show statistics that show how much safer the vehicle is than a human driver. And that means that Tesla is in the driver's seat, even though people over the past year or so have been saying like, look, Cruise, look, Waymo, they're way better than Tesla is. Tesla has been taking the turtle approach, the slow but steady approach, and they've been making progress, and they've not been overpromising, except for the fact that, Elon keeps saying that by the end of X year, they're going to have driverless vehicles on the road. Except for that, they've not been overpromising in the sense of saying, look, we are level 4 autonomous already. They're moving slowly about that. And because they're moving slowly, and because they have a generalized solution, and because it's inexpensive, and because it doesn't require remote advisors in addition to that expensive hardware, this is a scalable solution, which is going to be the one that will win out in the end. So again, my prediction is rest in peace, GM. We'll see what happens with Waymo Waymo, they seem to be doing okay. Google's got deep pockets. They don't care. They can keep losing billions of dollars if necessary on Waymo. So they're in a different situation. But again, they're not going to be able to scale nearly as rapidly as Tesla is. And in the meantime, Tesla is in the driver's seat for driverless driving. All right, I hope you enjoyed this video and found it fun and interesting and thought-provoking. If you did, please do like it so other people can find it. And of course, consider subscribing for more of this kind of content. As always, a huge shout out to my patrons on Patreon, my YouTube channel members, and of course, my ex-subscribers. Thank you all so much for supporting the channel in any way that you can. And if you want to join any of the teams, just check out the links in the description. And if you're interested in a whole bunch of really cool merch, check out our merch store. Link is in the description. We have TeslaBot t-shirts, the Tesla meme t-shirt, Success is a Possible Outcome, 4680 battery cells. All of that stuff is on t-shirts, mugs, tumblers, and on and on. So check it out. And finally, a big thanks once again to ZBiotics for sponsoring today's video. Be sure to go to zbiotics.com/Dr. No and use Dr. No at checkout to save 15% off your first order. In the meantime, I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.